In death, as in life, Diana, Princess of Wales, aroused intense feelings. Many thought her one of the greatest figures of the 20th century. Others dismissed her as an attention seeker or a curse visited on the royal family. This series is the first attempt to stand back from all the controversies and tell the real story of a remarkable life. The wedding of Diana's parents, Johnny and Frances Spencer, was the social event of 1954. Their first home was here at Park House, in the grounds of the Queen's own Sandringham estate, where in 1961, Diana was born.
When I look back to life at Park House, I do think to myself what a wonderful, free and easy life we had. Always, I remember just laughter and jokes. Diana was a real tease. She loved to eat. She'd go into the kitchen and she'd chatter away to the staff and cajole them into giving her this and giving her that.
Just a happy little girl. I mean, all those children were full of fun. And she was 3 years older than her little brother, and her two sisters were rather more than that older than her, so she did have a little bit of an older sister or a motherly way that she looked after Charles, and it was very endearing.
Diana mostly enjoyed going to the beach, and when we got to the beach hut, Diana would be rushing around, setting everything up, getting the water on so that we could all have a drink. They would have competitions to see who could take off from the top and jump the furthest down. Some of them used to roll the whole way down. They would wander around collecting shells. It was very carefree time.
When she was 7, Diana's parents divorced. Her father won custody of the children. For the rest of her childhood, Diana shuttled between the homes of her estranged parents. In recent years, much has been made of Diana's childhood unhappiness. When her marriage to Prince Charles broke down, his friends told writers that Diana's behavior suggested a serious mental illness, one that had begun with her parents' divorce and had later ruined her marriage. One writer who has received many briefings about Diana's behavior from Prince Charles's circle is Penny Junor.
I believe that Diana was suffering from a severe psychological disorder, and I think that she had this disorder when she went into the relationship. I think she had it. She developed it as a child.
But those who knew Diana at the time tell a different story. Her parents' divorce was acrimonious, but she knew none of the details. And afterwards she saw a lot of both her mother and her father.
Well, of course, any divorce is bound to affect children. I don't think it affected Johnny and Frances' children any more or any less than any others. After all, they were not particularly short of cash. They had two loving parents, and despite the parents being divorced, were as happy as could be expected.
Diana's childhood was extremely happy, contrary to so many versions.
I did not notice any way that the instability which she showed later started in her childhood. No, definitely not. I'd certainly never noticed it.
In the security of her own home, she became very extrovert, more or less to the point of showing off, particularly in skills that she knew she had, such as her swimming. She'd run to the top of the slide and stand there poised, and she was beautiful and slim, and shout to everyone, "Look at me, look at me."
Diana was not academic, but she was talented at music, swimming and dance.
Diana was popular at school. She was part of a very big group who were very lively, full of fun. Diana certainly wasn't the leader of the group, but neither was she just a hanger-on. There was no one leader. They were all headstrong, very lively girls.
In 1975, Diana's grandfather died, so she inherited a title.
She rushed along the corridor with her dressing gown billowing out behind her, saying, "I'm a lady, I'm Lady Diana." She was so excited.
When Diana was 15, her father remarried to Rayne, Countess of Dartmouth.
Well, I think Diana was very upset. She was devoted to her father, and I think perhaps any woman who came on the scene and wanted to take up all her father's time, she wouldn't have been too happy.
She was quite aware, I feel, that she was struggling with her schoolwork. She did try, and I think she hadn't a clue why she wasn't good. I think the underlying troubles at home in her family just affected her concentration. Her mind was somewhere else.
Diana failed all of her O-levels, but she was displaying other talents.
She'd go off on her bicycle to visit old ladies, to do their shopping for them, and she obviously had a real talent for dealing with people in that respect, and she obviously enjoyed it as well, and that was quite unusual for people of that age.
Diana helped run dances for patients at this hospital for the mentally and physically handicapped.
Diana was actually very relaxed, which was quite amazing because it was intimidating and overwhelming to walk into that huge place with the level of noise and to see some of the very severely handicapped people that we actually did have. She had most definitely a natural talent for communicating with very vulnerable people. I can remember seeing Diana do something that I was quite amazed, because she appreciated that when people in wheelchairs were taken onto the dance floor, because the handles are behind them, they were being whizzed around, but they weren't actually dancing in the same way as other people. Diana danced backwards and drew the wheelchair towards her by holding the arms of the wheelchair. Now, that actually is incredibly agile and clever.
To Diana and her school friends, Prince Charles was a pin-up.
She had photos of him. She seemed to idolise him.
Charles briefly dated Diana's older sister, Sarah.
Finally, she met him, and she rushed into school the following Monday saying, "I've met him, I've met him." And it was like a sort of ongoing fairy tale, and we never dreamed that it would actually come true.
Diana attended this finishing school in Switzerland, but didn't complete the course and went to live in London. In 1979, after studying ballet and cookery, she applied for 2 part-time jobs looking after children.
The agency read her references and they described her as sweet-tempered, wonderful with children, and willing to do whatever she's asked. My doorbell rang a day or 2 later. She said, "Mrs. Robertson, I'm Diana Spencer, so pleased to meet you."
She was never trained. She came purely as an assistant, But she did have a natural way with children. She was very good at getting down to their level, both physically and mentally. She didn't mind at all sitting on the floor, having children climbing all over her. And she talked to them. That's very important. And actually talked to them at eye level.
During the interview, what I liked most was that she focused totally on Patrick. She was ruffling his hair or handing him toys or giving him a little squeeze or a pat. Just absolutely an instant connection between the two of them. I never even checked her references further. I hired her on the spot.
When it came to lunchtime, she would be very happy to help prepare lunch. She was very domesticated.
Prince Charles was living in a very different world.
Problèmes du monde d'aujourd'hui seront les leurs demain. Et c'est à vous.
A bit impatient, an inquiring mind, very much like his father, full of ideas, very much like his father.
I'd known the Prince of Wales since he was about 16. He was wealthy, he was good-looking, he was intelligent, he was sporting, he was a man of action. He had all the aces.
There'd been a lot of talk about the dangers of this dive, the water so cold that a minute's exposure could cause paralysis.
He hated the phrase, and he won't like hearing it again, but I mean, he was described sometimes as action man. And there he was, unquestionably the most eligible bachelor in the entire world. Who was he going to marry? Somewhere along the line he'd said, maybe 30 might be a good time to get married. Often, with great respect to those who were named, I mean, completely dotty. Nothing wrong with the girl or the young woman in question, but never in a million years was she going to be the one. It just went on and on and on.
He took it very good-humouredly. I mean, you can either buckle under the stress of that particular pressure, or you can treat it in a light-hearted way and dissipate that problem. And that's what he did.
Charles was close to his great-uncle, Lord Louis Mountbatten. Mountbatten arranged rooms at his country home where Charles could enjoy privacy with his early girlfriends.
Because his own grandfather had died when he was a very small boy, and my father somehow, stepped into that position. And they were very, very close. Prince Charles always asked his advice about every sort of thing. And they also had a lot of fun together and a lot of laughs together. Got up to all sorts of things together.
When Lord Mountbatten was killed by an IRA bomb, Prince Charles was devastated. By now, Diana was enjoying the rounds of society parties and balls.
She looked magnificent whenever I saw her that summer. Quite lovely, and she seemed to have a great number of admirers. The time I remember her best was at a big ball at Belvoir Castle. Indeed, Prince Andrew was at that dance, and he danced with Diana, and of course he was her age, so that was all absolutely fine.
That summer, Diana got her first chance to make a real impression on Prince Charles at a country house barbecue.
We sat down on a bale at the barbecue. I said, "You looked so sad when you walked down the aisle at Mountbatten's funeral. It was the most tragic thing I've ever seen. My heart bled for you when I watched. I thought it's wrong. You're lonely. You should be with somebody to look after you."
Soon after, Charles invited Diana to Scotland to join him and his parents at their Balmoral estate. The Spencer family had close connections with the court. Diana's grandmother, Lady Fermoy, was lady-in-waiting to the Queen Mother.
Both grandmothers were involved, really, you might say, in the courtship. Both families were very enthusiastic about it taking place. It was definitely time that he got married, and here comes a girl who appears to be entirely suitable, so it's obvious that both families would encourage it and do what they could to promote it.
Years later, royal commentators would claim that at this stage of her life, at the start of her relationship with Prince Charles, Diana's mental instability was already beginning to show.
Diana suffered from borderline personality disorder as defined in Volume 4 of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders.
If you don't resolve the damage, you take it with you into adulthood, where it can affect your relationships with men.
The prince had been handed an almost impossible task.
But if Prince Charles's new girlfriend was suffering from a personality disorder, her employers saw no sign of it.
It was a huge step to hand over Patrick to a stranger in a strange city where we had no neighbors, we really didn't know anybody. But Diana just struck me as so sensible and grounded and committed to Patrick.
When she worked with us, she was a very normal, straightforward teenager. She was very shy, she was very kind, she was very considerate, always aware of others.
I really had no concerns about her being flighty or irresponsible. She was a very sensible young woman.
The public was soon told about Charles and Diana's romance.
And we first spotted her colleague Arthur Edwards, who was the photographer I worked with. He and I spotted her at a polo match.
I walked out with my camera and she just posed up. I thought, that's it, you know. And then I checked her age and found out she was 19. And I thought, Prince Charles, 30. He's running around with a 19-year-old girl. Doesn't sound right, so I didn't know about it.
During Diana's second visit to Balmoral, another photographer learned a little more.
We knew where Prince Charles's favourite fishing spots were, and we got to one, and we spotted a girl with him. I jumped out the car, and the girl disappeared into the trees behind Prince Charles, and he continued to fish as if there was no one with him. I watched for ages. Then I saw a hand coming round the tree with a compact mirror in her hand, and she pushed it round and wiggled it about to see where we were, and then walked away in a straight line, keeping the tree between us and her. And I thought, my God, who is this he's got? This is interesting.
He couldn't get a shot of Diana's face that day, but his rival at the Sun remembered the girl at the polo and put two and two together.
She burst into my bedroom and said, I have something important to tell you, Mrs. Robertson. And I was blowing my hair dry, and I said, oh, yeah, go ahead, tell me, Diana. And she said, no, I'd like your full attention, please. And she told me that when I left for work, I would see photographers and reporters at the end of the Muse. And again, I did a double take and said, you know, good heavens, Diana, what have you done?
We had television crews front and back. We had photographers hanging out of trees, peering in windows. And I said, what are they doing here? And a rather embarrassed Diana said to me, well, actually, I think it could be something to do with me. So I said, oh.
I asked if it was with Andrew, because I knew it was, they were the same age. And she said no, and, you know, she was blushing and kind of looking down at the floor and, you know, very modest, very demure, you know, very Diana, very understated. She said, no, actually, I'd been with Prince Charles. And I just couldn't believe it. I said, oh, you know, that's terribly exciting. You know, do you think anything's going to develop?
I went to the Ritz Hotel to photograph Princess Margaret's 50th birthday party. And this girl came up behind us, this very quiet sort of young girl, and said, excuse me, can I get through? And as she walked in, one of the other photographers said, I'm sure that's that girl, what's her name, Diana Spencer or whatever. So we all sort of camped outside the Ritz all evening, and she didn't appear. So you couldn't see anything from the party at all. And so everybody drifted off. It was about 2 o'clock in the morning, very cold, freezing night, and suddenly she came out. She was all huddled up in this really unattractive green woolly coat that really looked very sort of dull and dowdy. And I looked at her and I thought, no, I'm sure these stories can't be true.
We found this nursery school, the Young England Kindergarten. I knocked on the door. Does Lady Diana Spencer work here? Yes. Would she come out and have a photograph taken?
They hung around and wouldn't go away. And I said to her, how do we get rid of them? What about if you go and have your photograph taken with them? And we were both very naive in those days and didn't realise this was not the way to get rid of photographers.
But she insisted on having 2 children with her from the nursery. And, of course, that was the picture where the sun came out halfway through the photographs and we saw her wonderful legs.
And I remember thinking, oh, dear, I think I've really blown this for her. And she took one look at it, went bright red, and put her hands up to her face in absolute horror.
How well are you coping with all the press attention? Well, as you can see, you can tell. Are you bearing up with it quite well, though? Because it must be quite a strain with all of us after you. Well, it is, naturally.
At lunchtime, on occasions, we needed something. And quite often, she would be the one to say, well, I'll go out and get it. I mean, never a question of, would you mind? Because we knew what she was going to come up against. But I think she quite enjoyed belting out of the school. And in fact, one of my favourite photographs is of her running flat out with something for lunch under her arm.
She loved the camera, and she seemed to enjoy the attention in a sort of flustered, blushing sort of way. She couldn't resist it. We couldn't resist her.
We said we wouldn't have to wait too long.
Towards the end of 1980, when Diana was 19, the Spencer family was becoming excited by her developing relationship with the Prince of Wales.
I remember her father telling me that he was so thrilled that Prince Charles seemed to be so keen on Diana. But it wasn't really till after the New Year that we really knew it was going to, something was going to happen.
When I came to realise that the friendship between the Prince and Lady Diana was becoming very serious, and I thought back to the time when I'd seen her as a bridesmaid at her sister's wedding, yeah, I was a bit surprised. But by then she had grown up and matured, and I'm a sufficiently red-blooded average male to think, my word, she is a very, very attractive young lady. And what a lucky chap he is.
Prince Charles later authorised his friends to describe the impression Diana made to Penny Junor.
She swept everybody off their feet. I mean, all his friends and his family, all the people that he introduced, with 1 or 2 exceptions, the people he introduced Diana to thought she was sensational.
I thought that it was a match made in heaven, and I think most of us did. And I thought that the Prince of Wales would take Diana under his wing and teach her the ways of the royal family and the direction that she should follow. And I couldn't think of a better tutor.
Lady Diana?
Every morning outside her flat, Diana faced crowds of journalists.
He told reporters yesterday that it may be coming soon. Have you any comment to make about that? Lady Diana? No comment all round.
She'd even sit in the front seat of my car and read Private Eye. And Diana would hoot with laughter when she read some of that, but Prince Philip kicking corgis up and down the corridor and stuff. She just thought it was great fun.
Private Eye ran a series lampooning Charles and Diana's romance. The magazine also printed stories about Prince Charles's love life in the months before he met her. One described a former Prince Charles fancy, Camilla. In another, she was referred to as his confidante, Camilla Parker Bowles. Prince Charles's authorized biography indicates that he had been having an affair with Camilla Parker Bowles in the months before he met Diana. Camilla and her husband Andrew were at Balmoral when Diana was first spotted by the riverbank, and Charles took Diana to 2 weekend parties here at the Parker Bowles' home.
Charles had a number of very trusted close friends in whose houses he knew he would be safe. He would be able to take Diana. There would be no question of press leaks. They would be safe.
Diana and Charles stayed with the Parker Bowleses as their house guest, and the two couples went to the races together. Diana later said she spent a bit too much of the courtship in Camilla's company.
I'd been staying with the Parker Bowleses an awful lot, and I couldn't understand why she kept saying to me, "Don't push him into this, don't do that." She knew so much about what he was doing privately, and about what we were doing privately.
She would comment repeatedly about how hard he had to work, and she didn't like that because it meant that he didn't have much time to see her. He would be gone for long periods of time. They didn't have very many one-on-one dinners or romantic evenings. He was very busy. Certainly, yes, it was not dating as anybody would imagine it.
Charles wrote to a friend that he was in a confused and anxious state of mind over his intentions towards Diana. He also wrote,
"It is just a matter of taking an unusual plunge into some rather unknown circumstances that inevitably disturbs me. But I expect it will be the right thing in the end. It all seems so ridiculous because I do very much want to do the right thing for this country and for my family. But I'm terrified sometimes of making a promise and then perhaps living to regret it."
But Diana was certain of her feelings.
There is no doubt in my mind that she thought he was the most wonderful thing on the face of the earth, and she said specifically that she would simply die if this didn't work out.
Diana came back to visit just before she got engaged. She burst into our sitting room and just beamed. And of course we said, "What are these rumours? Are they true about you and Prince Charles?" And the beam got bigger and bigger, and she just said, "I can't possibly say," and continued to beam for the rest of the afternoon.
Since she was a small girl, Diana had looked forward to this moment.
We used to go for long walks across the estate. Diana used to say to me, "The only thing that I want is to be really happily married and to have lots of children." She said, "It's so sad to be on your own." She said, "I'm never going to be on my own," because she said, "My husband and I will always be together."
Just delighted and happy. And I'm amazed that she's been brave enough to take me on.
And I suppose in love.
Of course. Whatever in love means.
According to Diana, this was not the first time Charles had used this phrase.
He said, "Will you marry me?" I said, "Yes, I love you so much. I love you so much." He said, "Whatever love means." He said it then.
This man is not like the rest of us. He can't tell a little white lie. He can't just say, "Yes, of course, we're madly in love." He thinks too hard about everything and feels compelled to articulate what he's thinking.
To protect Diana from the media, the royal family found her a safe house. She left both her jobs and her flat, moved into Buckingham Palace, where she was given an apartment, a footman, and a maid. but Charles was often away.
Diana, from the moment she was engaged, was rather cut off from reality. She was leaving all her friends behind, all the close contacts, all the people who she could have had little girly talks with or received strength from.
It's a tremendous change for someone, if I may say, of 19 to make all of a sudden.
It is, but I've had a small run out to it all in the last 6 months. And next to Prince Charles and I can't go wrong. He's there with me. Prince Charles and I can't go wrong. He's there with me.
Whatever in love means.
The prince went off to Australia and New Zealand after they were engaged because he had to go. The arrangements had already been made.
As Charles was preparing to leave, he received a phone call.
The most awful thing had happened before he went. I was in his study talking to him when the telephone rang. It was Camilla, just before he was going for 5 weeks. I thought, shall I be nice, or shall I just sit here? So I thought I'd be nice, so I left them to it. It just broke my heart.
Soon after, Diana was filmed crying at the airport. When Charles had returned, Diana came across a present in the office of Michael Colborne, the prince's secretary. She later explained what happened to royal biographer Anthony Holden.
Diana was looking over the wedding presents and saw one that she wasn't supposed to see, which was a bracelet with the initials G and F on it. And Camilla and Charles's nicknames for each other, or code names if you like, were Gladys and Fred. And Diana knew this from some flowers that Charles had sent Camilla when she was ill. So poor Colborne was in a very unenviable situation of having to explain to the princess-to-be that this was actually a present that Charles had ordered to give to Camilla as a sort of farewell, I'm getting married present.
Diana confronted Charles about the bracelet. According to 2 royal courtiers, Diana said,
I asked Charles if he was still in love with Camilla Parker Bowles, and he didn't give me a clear answer. What am I to do?
One of their colleagues told this program,
My initial reaction was to panic. It was 10 days until the wedding. How do we get her down the aisle?
In an attempt to defuse the situation, the courtiers arranged a lunch between Diana and Camilla in a discreet London restaurant called Ménage à Trois. Senior courtiers have told this program that when Diana returned to the palace, she said,
It was brilliant. We all understand each other.
But Diana later told a different story.
She told me that Camilla asked her, would you be spending much time hunting? And Diana said, no, I don't like horses. I fell off one when I was a child. And she could see the look of relief on Camilla's face. She certainly believed that hunting and horses was going to be how Camilla would keep Charles.
The presence of Camilla in Charles's life, whether she was his lover, his friend, or merely the recipient of his gifts, would go on causing Diana anxiety. Days later, Diana learned that Charles was planning to visit Camilla and give her the bracelet. Less than a week before the wedding, Diana went to watch Charles playing polo.
Following up, battling it out with Prince Charles. Prince Charles now is going to fall for Donna. Donna's looking very good.
She broke down in tears.
Isn't bad. It's
The palace staff blamed nerves and exhaustion.
This is the third chukker. Everything to play for.
I was playing in the match, and Prince Charles was playing for the Navy. I think the Army lost by 1 goal. Actually, I fouled him before the end of the last chukker, which gave away a penalty, a 40-yard penalty, from which he was able to score. So it was my fault that they lost. He got the goal, and I said, well, there's your wedding present, sir.
As her wedding day approached, Diana asked courtiers whether Charles really loved her. Embarrassed by such directness, they changed the subject. One told this program,
"Lovely chap though he was, Charles gave no indication of thinking through what getting married to him would be like for Diana. He carried on with his merry ways, his extracurricular bachelor life. To her, it was a massively bigger thing."
But Diana and Charles did have happy times during their engagement.
The people of Tetbury look upon the couple as their next-door neighbours, for Highgrove House is less than a mile away from the church bells. On the big day, this area is going to be alive with street celebrations, so today was something of a rehearsal.
He'd introduced her to the locals, they did a walkabout and visited the local hospital. And, you know, she was very nervous. He was like the proud peacock showing her off, but he was very gentle and he always had an arm around her, showing her what to do, watching her all the time, and obviously was sort of gently nurturing her into it.
And Diana was cheerful when she returned to the kindergarten where she had worked.
We, I suspect, were the only people who had the bride-to-be at our royal wedding party. She was very happy and obviously very excited. She was looking wonderful.
But Diana, only just 20, was swinging between euphoria and despair.
I'm sure that Diana did have reservations about getting married at that stage because her father told me so. She said just before the wedding, "I'm afraid I simply cannot go through with it. I can't go through with it."
When she expressed these reservations to anyone, such as her sister Sarah, they joked it off. Sarah told her, "Well, your face is on the tea towel, so it's too late to do anything now." Other people said to her, "Well, it's just simply pre-wedding nerves. You'll be all right once the day arrives."
She was extremely gentle, very shy, and she was someone that, as a young girl, you thought was everything a princess should be. Very beautiful, very young, very calm, and yet there was a certain nervousness about her.
I just remember my first reaction when she got out of the carriage was when I looked at her dress and I thought, oh no, it's awful, because it was all scrunched up and it looked terrible. And I just thought, oh God, you know, and that doesn't look like it's been ironed.
The feeling inside the cathedral, I remember, was just enormous. It's a very sort of hollow place, but it was filled with so many people and so much warmth.
The thing I remember the most about the wedding, funnily enough, was not only the atmosphere inside, but also hearing the noises from outside, because that was the only way that you were aware that actually there were an awful lot of other people watching this event as well.
I remember being so in love with my husband that I couldn't take my eyes off him. I absolutely thought I was the luckiest girl in the world. He was going to look after me. Walking down the aisle, I spotted Camilla. pale grey pillbox hat. Saw it all. Her son Tom standing on a chair. To this day, you know. Vivid memory. Well, there you are. Let's hope that's all over with.
Charles Philip Arthur George, wilt thou have this woman to thy wedded wife? Wilt thou love her, comfort her, honour and keep her in sickness and in health, and forsaking all other, keep thee only unto her, so long as ye both shall live?
I will.
Here is the stuff of which fairy tales are made. The prince and princess on their wedding day. But fairy tales usually end at this point with the simple phrase, they lived happily ever after.
750 million people watched Diana's wedding on television. Every gesture and word was analysed.
I had a contact inside the palace who was very close to the balcony, who telephoned me from inside Buckingham Palace and said that Charles had asked for the Queen's permission to kiss Diana. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, Andrew said, go and give her a kiss. Charles replied, I'm not getting into that caper. And Andrew says, oh yes, go on. And Charles says to his mother, may I? And the Queen says yes, and he then kisses her.
Such intense scrutiny would continue. Before their marriage, Diana had complained that Charles was often away, and on their honeymoon, life on board the royal yacht Britannia was anything but private. There were formal dinners, church parades, and the constant attendance of crewmen and courtiers. The difference in the couple's interests drew them apart. As Charles wrote at the time, he was happy reading.
All I can say is that marriage is very jolly, and it's also extremely pleasant being together in Britannia. Diana dashes about, chatting up all the sailors and the cooks in the galley, while I remain hermit-like, sunk with pure joy into one of Lawrence van der Post's books.
One evening, while Charles was dressing for dinner, the first serious row of their marriage broke out.
She finds him wearing cufflinks with his initials on, which he's been given by Camilla. She protests about this. He protests back and says she's a close friend, why shouldn't I wear the cufflinks? I think any bride would be entitled to be a bit upset if a newlywed husband wore cufflinks given him as a wedding present by another woman about whom she was very concerned.
Charles and Diana's honeymoon included a month in the Highlands with the Queen, the royal family, and a group of Charles's friends.
How are you enjoying married life?
Highly recommend it.
How do you like Balmoral as a place?
Lovely.
Have you cooked a breakfast yet?
I don't eat breakfast.
For the cameras, they put on a good show, but the couple spent much time apart. Charles read and painted. He also hunted and walked, accompanied by his friends. Diana tended to stay indoors.
Knowing the Prince of Wales as I did, and knowing the fact that most of his friends had been older than he was, I did wonder how she would cope at the dinner table. Not putting her down in any way, but I mean, she would just not be in the same league.
A guest at Balmoral told this programme,
At dinner one night, the Queen cornered me and said, I don't know what we can do. Look at her sitting at the table glowering at us. The only time she bucks up is when Charles speaks to her. I said to her, perhaps if you look round the table, they're all so much older than her. She said, I don't care, she'll just have to buck up.
Another courtier reflected on the honeymoon.
Two things screwed the relationship: the Queen and his family constantly siding with him, and the Camilla question. Diana was always asking about it.
I remember crying my eyes out. At night I dreamt of Camilla the whole time. It rained and rained and rained. I didn't trust him. Thought every 5 minutes he was ringing her up.
Charles was so worried that he summoned his trusted aide, Michael Colburn, from London. He asked Colburn to sit with Diana while he and his friends went out stalking deer. Colburn sat alone with the princess from 9 until 4. Between brooding silences, she complained to him about Balmoral and Charles's absences.
I believe that when he got married, Prince Charles fully knew what getting married meant, what it involved. Perhaps he thought that he would be able to keep more of his old lifestyle going than would normally be the case. He would still want to go hunting, and he would still prefer the companionship from time to time of older people, which he always had done.
Even before their honeymoon was over, a pattern had been set that the royal couple would find difficult to break. Charles bewildered at Diana's distress, Diana suspicious whenever Charles was away from her.
Diana's whole life, in all the years that I knew her, from a young child through to her marriage, the main emphasis within her life had been placed on the importance of a marriage with love and a close family unit. Without those, she would have felt that the marriage was a sham.
Three months after her wedding, Diana's first public appearances as a princess were in Wales. After 2 noisy and tiring days, the tour reached the quiet market town of Brecon.
It was very cold, but people didn't seem to notice the cold because they were so excited about Diana coming. And then we heard all the cheering from downtown, so we knew they'd arrived. So it was just a matter of waiting then for them to walk up through the towns.
Prince Charles indicated to me that they would each take a side of the road. And at a certain stage, he would take the initiative and he would decide to go over. And every time this happened, you had this huge awe from the people that she was leaving. And all the time, people kept calling,
"Die, die," to come to their side. So I don't know quite how Charles felt, but we were thrilled.
In a sea of unfamiliar faces, Diana sought reassurance from one she recognized from before her marriage.
She actually mouthed, "How am I doing?" And I just burst out laughing and said, "OK," back to her. But we still had that little bit of contact then. She needed to find out, was she doing it right from somebody?
She was so conscious of the small children behind the barriers, and irrespective of the fact that that outfit of hers must have cost a mint, down she goes, not just bending, but down on her haunches to these little ones behind the barriers.
I'd like to try to express my thanks to you in Welsh. Mae'n blesor cardod e Gymru, hoffwn ddod eto un bien. Diolch un fawr.
Until now, Prince Charles had always been the centre of attention. A senior courtier who accompanied the couple in Wales told this programme,
"I caught Charles kicking a pebble around. He said, 'They don't want to see me.'"
He was picking up the flowers and they were saying, "Could you possibly give this to your wife, please?" And he said rather ruefully, "Well, you know, at least I know my place now. I'm nothing more than a carrier of flowers for my wife." And that was fine to begin with.
I've come to the conclusion that really it would have been far easier to have had 2 wives. To have covered both sides of the street. And I could have walked down the middle, directing the operation.
In the midst of all this walkabout and touring, Diana wouldn't do anything. Charles would do lots of things. He would make speeches. A lot of the speeches he thought were quite important speeches because he had a huge audience, so he'd worked hard at a speech. And of course, the next day, nothing would appear of Charles. I mean, it wasn't the Charles and Diana show, it was the Diana show.
He said, well, this pressure, that will go away, won't it? And I said, I'm sorry, but it won't. No, and it never will. I wish I could tell you otherwise, but if I did, I would be telling you a lie.
Diana was photographed outside a sweet shop and was upset by it. The Fleet Street editors were summoned to Buckingham Palace.
And in came the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh, and she made it clear that she was worried that Diana had not got the experience of having been followed by photographers all her life. And this was something new, and she felt that the poor girl was being harassed.
For the Queen to share such worries with the press was unprecedented.
She said, for example, she goes down to the local shop, village shop, to buy some sweets or something, and there are photographers and reporters there. Can't you leave her alone?
The Sun's editor, Kelvin Mackenzie, had been invited to attend the meeting, but declined.
The Sun had no reverence for the royal family. We didn't believe in following rules laid down by the old guard at the palace. We went our own way, and Kelvin printed my stories, whether they liked them or not.
Everyone liked the next story. Just a year after her wedding, Diana gave birth to a son, Prince William.
Your Royal Highness! How are you feeling, Your Highness? How are you feeling?
3 months later, at the funeral of Princess Grace of Monaco, Diana represented the Queen. One of the staff who accompanied her told this programme,
"She was absolutely brilliant. She came into her own." And on the aircraft back, she burst into tears with exhaustion. She asked, "Will Charles be there to meet us?" We looked at her big eyes looking out of the window in expectation. She said, "There's one police car." That meant that Charles wasn't coming.
Another courtier recalled,
"She rang up and asked me, 'Have you seen the papers?' I said, 'You are absolutely brilliant, ma'am.' She said, 'Thanks for saying that, because nobody at Balmoral has mentioned it.'"
Diana, just 21, began looking for a role of her own.
She wasn't swallowed up by the royal family, and she didn't just become another member of the royal family. She had her very, very much her own personality, which she was enabled to express, and when she had her own interests, she was able to pursue them.
I first met the Princess of Wales about 6 months after William was born. At the time, I ran a mother and baby research charity called Birthright. She came to an event, the Brilliant and Beautiful Evening of Fashion. She kept on running back to me and saying, "Am I doing it right?" She was terribly nervous, trembling, unsure of herself.
A year later, the royal couple embarked on a 6-week tour of Australia and New Zealand. Diana was a sensation.
She was a mega star. I mean, there was just thousands, hundreds of thousands of people just come to see this lady. And I mean, it was no secret. She loved it. I mean, she absolutely loved it. She was the star in this open-top car. She was arriving like she was already the Queen. You know, she was so... The crowd was screaming for her. Diana, Diana.
But even within her own family, some worried about the adulation she was receiving.
Diana had much too much fame, much too early. In fact, I remember being pestered by everybody, saying that you're related to Diana, this perfect being. I mean, she was almost a goddess at that stage. It was pathetic what people thought about her.
She did take centre stage. This was one of the problems that came between her and the Prince of Wales. That she became such a glamorous figure as his wife, that she stole the limelight, and I don't think he minded that initially at all. I think in fact he was rather pleased and proud, but it grew irksome as the time went on.
She was inundated with praise, and she was on the front of every magazine. She was just unable really to get on with settling down as the wife and mother that she should have done. And I think that's where the problem started.
2 years after Prince William's birth, Prince Harry was born. On the surface, all was well, but Diana was frustrated.
The Princess of Wales felt that she had a contribution to make, that she was talented, that she had a wonderful sense of communication, that it wasn't appreciated as it should have been.
Diana suffered from lack of praise and lack of company.
She would go back to Kensington Palace in the evening and have dinner by herself, on a tray on her knees, watching television. And it was that she found disturbing. The adulation on the one hand and the loneliness on the other.
Some palace employees had sold stories to the newspapers. Diana was advised to be discreet. She looked for friends outside the royal circle.
I used to look after her sister, and they obviously talked about me, and she expressed a desire to meet me and to have some treatments, and we took it from there. When I very first met her, about the third visit that she came to me, she said, do you think that you could call me Diana? And I said, well, if it's not presumptuous, yes, I would love to.
Janet Filderman soon became one of Diana's closest confidants. She has never before spoken publicly.
We'd talk on the telephone a great deal. I mean, she'd phone me up in the evenings, probably 9 o'clock or something like that, or later sometimes.
I name this ship Royal Princess. May God bless her and all who sail in her.
It's sad for a young woman to end her busy day on her own. For her, the joy would have been if she could have come home and had a conversation with her husband about what her day had been like. Now, she could have spoken to him on the telephone for all I was aware, but it would appear that this didn't happen very often because she phoned me or she phoned some other friend.
You have, ladies and gentlemen,
he is Prince of Wales. His duty is 9/10 of his life. He is committed on every day of the year, practically, to some good cause or some engagement. He cannot, with the best will in the world, however head over heels in love he might be, he cannot devote 100% of his time to a woman.
Prince Charles's regular absences made Diana think that he had resumed his affair with Camilla Parker Bowles.
She talked to me about Camilla, and I did the best I could to calm her down, to make her put her energies into constructive things.
Diana's suspicion about her husband and Camilla was a source of repeated conflict within Kensington Palace. Soon, journalists were picking up hints that all was not well.
I was being told behind the scenes that there were problems in the marriage, that they were rowing and arguing, fighting.
A senior courtier told this programme
she wanted him to stay at home with her and the children. There were tantrums and hysterics. She challenged him. It was the first time he had been challenged.
In describing his marriage to a friend, Prince Charles wrote,
"It is like being trapped in a rather desperate cul-de-sac with no apparent exit."
But in public, they continued triumphant. On the royal couple's first American tour, Diana's dresses were made by Britain's most fashionable designers. The purpose of the visit was to promote British art and heritage. But all eyes were on the fairy tale princess.
The American media's tongue was hanging out, though, during the whole trip, and they just loved the glamour and loved the way she looked.
When she first came here, she was asked who she'd like to meet, and I don't think there was anyone who would have refused her. She could have had anyone she wanted, in other words, and she picked John Travolta.
Dance with the princess, Mr. Travolta. She'd like you to. What sort of dance would you choose for preference? Oh, something of her choice.
The White House has these menu cards, which often people sign and pass them around, so you have a kind of record of all the autographs of who's at your table. And the princess was sitting on the right of the president, President Reagan, and then next to her was Baryshnikov.
Baryshnikov, the great Russian dancer, was seated next to Diana because of her childhood enthusiasm for ballet.
And as the menu cards came around, it stopped Baryshnikov, and she said, "But what's the matter? Don't you want me to autograph yours?" And he was shy. And she said, "Well, you know, I have your autograph." She had stood in the rain outside the stage door at Covent Garden as a teenager in order to get Baryshnikov's autograph, and that melted him.
Diana had asked to meet the woman for whom she had worked as a nanny.
Diana was just herself. She rushed across the floor, didn't give us a chance to curtsy or bow. Again, that wonderful big hug. How are you? How wonderful to come all this way. Patrick picked him up, you know, just Diana again. Charles was very witty, very gracious, and they got Patrick settled on the sofa between the two of them. They looked very happy to me. They even joked, I had my daughter by then. They were even joking with each other about, well, they hoped that the next time that they would have a girl.
The great degree of taste and the amazing...
Attention frequently wandered from the purpose of the visit.
Collected so much throughout Europe.
We had a press conference, which was the opportunity for the prince actually to sing for his supper. And then the very first question from the press has to do with how the princess enjoyed dancing with John Travolta.
Well, I'm not a glove puppet, so I can't answer for that, I'm afraid. But I think you enjoyed it, didn't you, darling? Be an idiot if she didn't enjoy dancing with John Travolta, wouldn't she?
Diana seemed relaxed in public, but was beginning to reveal hints of her unhappiness.
Diana wrote immediately to me, which in itself is strange. And she referred to the fact that it was wonderful seeing Patrick and me because it reminded her of such a happy time in her life, and it was wonderful to get back in touch with people she'd known when her life was simpler and happier.
I sent her a birthday card and was very surprised and very thrilled to get a letter thanking me for the card. I mean, a thank you letter for a birthday card in itself was fairly remarkable, but the fact that it actually had been written on the day of her birthday, I actually found rather sad, because I felt she should have been doing other things than sitting there writing thank you letters for birthday cards.
Dearest Janet, you really are the most thoughtful person I know. Never to miss a birthday or anything important, especially in my life, exclamation mark. You restored me completely last night, as on our return from the tour, I felt an emotional wreck, that you're very much in my thoughts. Keep smiling. With love from Diana. And there's a little man who's smiling all the time, and she does that from time to time. She's rather sweet.
Diana looked so thin that some thought she might be anorexic. Years later, Diana said that throughout the early years of the marriage, she had suffered from the eating disorder bulimia nervosa. But the woman who worked on her skin thinks that Diana's bulimia was intermittent, a response to moments of stress.
I don't think she had bulimia as I know it. I mean, I have 2 or 3 clients who have really been like that and are like that in some instances. And believe me, there's no comparison, because Diana had a super figure, wonderful teeth, good quality hair, skin was good, eyes were bright. I don't think you can have any of those outward signs if you have bulimia badly.
While the popular press focused on Diana's weight, they began to treat her husband as a figure of fun. They mocked his public speeches, his policy initiatives, and even his passion for gardening. Prince Charles agreed to help with the writing of a biography that would highlight his serious work. He encouraged his friends to speak to the author, Penny Junor.
I was picking up very strong vibrations that there were real problems in the marriage. The marriage simply was not a success.
Diana said later that she was sure that her husband had been seeing Camilla Parker Bowles throughout the marriage. But Prince Charles's closest friends told Penny Junor that it was only now, in the mid-1980s, that the two re-established contact.
Charles went back to Camilla in 85, 86. Friends brought them together. Friends who were desperately worried about the prince. He was incredibly despondent. I mean, he was on the brink of real despair. And friends thought that he needed someone to talk to. They knew that he had always got on very well with Camilla. She'd always been very good for him, good with him.
After 5 years of marriage, Diana was spending most of her time at Kensington Palace and Prince Charles at their country home, Highgrove. Then in June 1986, Diana met a young cavalry officer. He was at Buckingham Palace to help organise the mounted escort for the wedding of Prince Andrew.
And I think she said something like, where are you going dressed up? Like a dog's dinner or something like that. It was quite sweet. Basically, I was struck by her charisma, if you like, and her beauty. And she had very piercing blue eyes. I think she was trying to find out more about me and what I did, and she learnt that, I was a riding instructor. And that's really how we started. I mean, she then said she would like to learn to ride, or learn to ride again. She had hurt herself as a young child, falling off and lost her nerve, and wanted to get her nerve back again. She said, I wish I could come riding more often. I wish I could see you more often. Would you like to come and have lunch, or would you like to come to the opera? So, I mean, it was becoming more evident to this rather slow brain that she enjoyed, my company. We'd been riding, I think it was sort of fairly winterish, and we were having coffee and biscuits in the officers' mess at Windsor. It was quite crisp and cold outside. She just poured out all her problems to me. Which was extraordinary, because that was the first time I realized how dreadfully unhappy she was. And she was very tearful at that stage. So she came and sat next to me and, and we hugged each other.
Prince Charles, too, had found support outside the marriage, as Penny Junor's biography hinted.
I'm not saying they immediately began an affair once they got together again, but they started to talk, and he desperately needed someone to talk to. Charles had never loved anyone quite so much, either before or since. The clear implication, although I didn't actually spell it out, being that Camilla had been, and once again was, a great love of his life.
James Hewitt invited Diana to visit him at his mother's home in Devon. It was to be the first of many such weekends.
Detective had to come down and sort of suss the joint out and make sure that she would obviously be safe. We were all a little apprehensive, hoping that everything would be all right. But thereafter, there was no problem.
Diana always arrived in Devon with her royal protection officers, who also spent weekends at the house.
She'd arrive on a Friday evening, and she'd come bouncing in an excited mood. And then just, sort of go up and, hug my mother and say hello. Probably half knocking her over, and, because my mother hadn't quite got up from her curtsy yet.
She was the person I had envisaged her to be. She was just Diana. She discovered that we liked a little tipple after our dinner at night, and so she nicked a bottle of orange vodka from the cellar at Highgrove, and it was excellent. And thereafter, each time she came down, she managed to smuggle a bottle. I should think Prince Charles must have wondered, he must have thought he had a secret drinker in the house.
She enjoyed the family existence and the friendship, and, she wanted to be a part of it. Of everyone mucking in the kitchen and helping and washing up. I mean, she wouldn't cook, but she'd wash up. Great laughy times.
They seemed to enjoy each other's company. They seemed to be relaxed in each other's company, and it was fun. Diana sat back in the chair and looked up and looked around, and she said, "Christ, this is such a lovely place." Sometimes they used to borrow my car because it was a little less conspicuous to go off rather than her rather smart green Jaguar.
We'd go for a walk along the beach at Budleigh Salterton, along the Pebble Beach there. So, as near as damn it was sort of normal existence, yeah. She would say, it'd be great to just be an army wife. That's what she wanted. That's what she said she wanted. And to, find somewhere that's cosy and comfortable. A bit of a sort of a dream house, a dream cottage. We spoke about that at length quite often. It wasn't just a fling. It certainly wasn't just a fling for me, and I know that it wasn't a fling for her. I was deeply in love at that stage, and, well, I hope that she... I mean, if she had felt half as much of that, then I would be very happy to think that.
I suppose I had in the back of my mind, you know, is this a pipe dream, or is it going to come about? I hoped that no one was going to get hurt.
Back in London, Diana's public life was changing. She received hundreds of requests to become patron of charities. The Middlesex Hospital was about to open a pioneering AIDS unit.
A letter was written to the palace asking whether a member of the royal family would be prepared to open the ward. And I think we actually expressed a preference for Prince Charles, and we got a letter back saying no, he was too busy, but would we consider the Princess of Wales? And we jumped at it. The media were absolutely everywhere. She was very nervous, and I have to say we were very nervous. She came in, we did a very short seminar for her, and then we took her into the ward.
In 1987, panic about AIDS had turned those suffering from it into outcasts. Some believed that the disease could be transmitted by a casual touch.
The moment somehow she started sort of meeting patients, she did relax. And of course there was that very famous photograph of her shaking hands with a patient who had AIDS, and that was wired all over the world. It made a tremendous impact, just a member of the royal family touching someone. It was a colossal impact. Shouldn't have been, but it was.
But Diana believed that the rest of the royal family were uneasy about her success.
She told me that, you know, I think they're jealous because I seem to be more popular. There was definitely friction in the family. Actually, there were times when she was frustrated, so much so that, you know, she would become unguarded in her criticism, for example, towards the Queen. She would say, you know, the Queen doesn't appreciate what I'm doing. She's not helping me. I try to... I mean, she strongly felt that she wasn't getting any support from above.
The phone might go, and it would be Diana ringing from some outlandish place to see how we all were. And it wasn't just a sort of 3-minute sort of, you know, hello, how are you? I'm here in such and such a country. But she would, you know, want to know what one had been doing, and she'd chat away and say most probably what she'd been doing or what she hadn't been doing. And it was like, well, just as if she wanted to make contact back home.
Diana and James Hewitt tried to live like a normal couple whenever possible. Hewitt regularly stayed with Diana at Kensington Palace and Highgrove.
Policeman would open the barrier and said, oh yes, we're expecting you, and park outside their apartments. There were times where I arrived before she had returned, and she'd come in still fairly hyped up and bubbly and excited, and the whole place would light up and change, and she'd come over and hug me and say, I can see you've started on the whiskey already, or something like that. And there was always a joke and a laugh and a kiss, and it was just wonderful. I mean, it's just wonderful existence.
Prince Charles and Diana were apart not only for some weekends. On weekdays too, they often had separate engagements, and Diana had become a confident solo act.
The contrast between the early Diana, terribly nervous, anxious, and the Diana in later years was extraordinary. I remember there was this big event at Buckingham Palace. Lots of people who'd paid £1,000 a head to be there. And She just looked at me and she said, "Let's plunge in, Vivian." Held her nose and said, "Here we go." And off she went, and utterly confident to work a room.
Diana's confidence was boosted by the fact that her affair remained out of the newspapers.
My best contacts were royal servants, and they would tell me the truth. We picked up on the Hewitt affair and believed that they were meeting in secret and believed that they were lovers. But again, how would you prove it? How could you write it? Impossible.
Prince Charles and Camilla Parker Bowles risked being seen together at society parties. Diana and James Hewitt were also seen in public together.
She said, "Well, what are you doing this weekend? Can we go down to Devon, or will you come to Highgrove, or whatever?" And so I said, "No, I'm afraid I can't, or we can't go to Devon because I've got to play in a match on Saturday in Tidworth." And she said, "Oh, dear, well, can I come and watch?" I said, "Well, that's going to be very difficult, isn't it? And it's going to be, I'd love you to, but I mean, it's going to be really obvious." And she said, "Oh, I suppose so, you're right." She said, "Who are you playing?" And I said, "We're playing the 13th, 18th. And you could see her face light up and a twinkle in her eye, and she immediately got a plan together in her mind. She said, "I'm colonel of the regiment."
The big match starts at 2:30.
And the commanding officer came over, and he said, "James, I think you ought to know, just keep this to yourself, but Princess of Wales is coming to support us. You might just want to be aware, follow the right protocol and all that." I said, "Oh, well, thank you very much indeed, Colonel, for letting me know that."
The guest of honour had to present the trophy to the victors, led by James Hewitt.
I don't think she could speak, other than saying, "Well done." I think she was about to get the giggles. She didn't really say very much to me at all. But I mean, she looked at me and I looked at her, and we didn't really need to say anything. So I said thank you very much and walked back as quickly as I could. And then she actually held the others in conversation. Again, put in a wonderful show. And she said to Rupert Mackenzie Hill, "You're wonderful. I've heard so much about you." And she was just having great fun. It was a lovely, lovely day.
Diana's romance was a widely shared secret. A senior courtier told this programme,
"When I joined royal service, I was quietly told that Charles and Diana had both found love with new partners. There was a great deal of pleasure taken in this in the palace."
I suppose it was quite weird being at Highgrove. It was far harder to relax there, of course, than, for example, in Devon, because there were staff there, and with all that entails. Those who work there were, kept very much in the background. I suppose, other than when you walked around the gardens and the camera follows you, the security camera follows you. But inside the house, a little more relaxed. Diana told me that she had discussed our relationship with her husband. It was a tacit understanding between Diana and Charles that I was a part of her life in the same way that Mrs. Parker Bowles was a part of Prince Charles's life. Not only that, suggesting that it was understood by those who are in political authority and over us, and security, and the household, the royal household. you know, those three factions knew about it. They knew the extent of the relationship, yet nothing was done, no approach was made to stop it. Now, that to me means that there is some kind of approval.
Aristocratic, well-bred families have, when their own marriage has staled, or they've grown bored with one another, or it hasn't worked out, for whatever reason, they traditionally have not divorced, but they have pursued relationships elsewhere and remained together for the sake, in aristocratic families, for the estates and the inheritance, and for the children. Now, it seemed to me that this is what they had.
I know that at certain stages she wanted to reconcile her marriage and to try and get Charles to love her. I know that. You know, I didn't relish in it, but I would have been fine. I mean, it would have been, you know... had she gone back to him, I think that would have been a good thing, if it had lasted. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Rival camps of friends, his and hers, began to talk.
At the time, and this was about 1987, 1988, I was aware that there was a lot of briefing against Diana. That, you know, she was unstable, or she was difficult, she was awkward.
The briefings from Charles's friends would come very often at polo matches when he would be playing, you'd be on the sidelines, and the subject would come up of the marriage and suggestions that it wasn't going very well. And then the friend would say, well, of course, she can be a very difficult woman, can't she? And so, subtly, or perhaps unsubtly at times, they planted the seed that Diana was the one to blame.
After 8 years of marriage, Diana made her first high-profile solo visit overseas. On the 3-day trip to New York to raise money for the arts and to boost British exports, she also asked to visit institutions for the most deprived. Diana's private office approached the Henry Street Refuge for the Homeless in New York's poor Lower East Side. The staff had a long-standing suspicion of celebrity visits.
I feel like the princess might be on a guilt trip, like not really concerned about our people, but more like, well, it'll be in the newspaper on the society page that Princess Diana came to see a homeless shelter, rather than really having an impact on what's happening to poor people.
Diana's New York visit was organized by her new equerry, Patrick Jeffson.
Royalty very often is theatre. My job was to make sure that she appeared in a way which brought most credit to the organization that she was representing or visiting. She was very pragmatic, rather perhaps like a politician in that way. She knew the raw power of the media, almost instinctively.
And they opened the door, and this very tall, thin woman got out, and she reached for my hand, and she's shaking my hand, and she's, oh, hi, and she's, so then I'm like, whoa. So these are all split-second kinds of things, but then before I could get nervous, then she says, hey, we're wearing the same colors. Then for me, it was like, this woman is real. And the princess, she had a way of kind of looking down when she speaks. So you kind of got to look up at her, and she's tall too, so we were kind of looking up, and I saw Shirley kind of looking like, uh-oh, Shirley. Finally, Shirley said, ooh, but you so pretty. And that's when everybody rolled. We were like, uh-oh.
And I just burst out. I said something like, listen, I just got to say it. I don't know if I should say it or not, but oh my God, your skin. Your skin is so beautiful. And then everybody started laughing because it was, you know, it was like everybody being so polite, so, you know, And she was just so human. I think Frances dropped a button.
One of the buttons popped off and she beat me to it, picked it right up, and she said to me, we have to keep up with these little things. So it was like really nice. And then her conversation was, it was just genuine. She wasn't just asking questions, she was there with us.
So by now, you know, we're like old buddies. People were crowded all around. There was a kid with some tulips. And she just broke away from security, from where we were, and went over to that kid, and she started shaking hands with everybody on the behind the barricade. And again, it was like, wow, just look at her.
A, B, C, D, E, F, G.
Some have looked at Diana's charity work with less sympathy, accusing her of being more interested in headlines than helping the needy.
I've studied a number of celebrities, reprobate politicians and others who've gone the charity route to enhance their reputations or to try and recover them. Over the even medium run, it's indissolubly related to cynicism.
Patrick Jeffson, who was with Diana at Henry Street, has also questioned her motives for visits like this.
The compassion she showed at the time was quite genuine. So the motives that brought her to that place might be less than entirely compassionate. But while she was there doing the job, I was never in any doubt that her compassion was genuine. And I think the people on the receiving end knew that too.
She talked to a child. She didn't just talk to the kid. She saw his shoes was untied, just being a natural, and just tied his shoes. You know, went to the family school, was down there with the kid. You would think of a princess. You know, you would, you know, like, I don't want to compare, but, you know, stuck up in the nose or whatever, you know, but she wasn't like that at all. Because, like I said, she's still here, a piece of her. She left that here.
But back home, Diana's private life came under pressure. James Hewitt, who had been stationed in Windsor, was given a new posting to Germany.
She said, do you have to go? And I said, well, yes, I do have to go to Germany. There is no way around it. Well, can I speak to Colonel Michael? Or, I said, well, yes, but, you know, it's going to appear to be very strange, you know, and they're not going to send me because I'm your riding instructor. She was tearful and made me feel as though I didn't care. But of course I did. I cared, but I couldn't really do much about it. I didn't know what to do. The idea of being in Germany wasn't as horrific as it may first appear, because, let's face it, you know, it wasn't as though we were living together. We were seeing each other 2-3 times a week, perhaps once a week, and that pattern could have continued in Germany.
But the promised visits home were few and far between.
I flew out one weekend to be with him. He gave me a lovely weekend. We had a super time, and I think I might have had an inkling then that things perhaps were cooling it a bit.
After a while, I mean, it just sort of petered out, and I think, you know, I think she felt that I let her down badly by doing that, and I think she was, you know, she needed someone around her, and I wasn't there to be around her.
With her husband now re-established with Camilla Parker Bowles, Diana was alone again. Her next relationship would become public knowledge, detonating an open war between her and Prince Charles, and a crisis for the royal family.